I think that that point, that is totally to the point. We have a very recent legislation on infrastructure, on telecommunication and the digital home. The legislation is rather recent, and it has totally forgotten to include this. The law on personal autonomy does have an annex at the end in which the need to take into account the autonomy of people to promote personal autonomy. And I think if we conducted a survey in Spain to see whether this has been taken into account, I think that we would only reach 0.7%. And I think that we need to introduce penalties and sanctions. As Alejandro was saying, if you build a house with some kind of public subsidy and you do not take into account accessibility factors in the house, well, you will be penalized. If you are awarded a tender to sell a certain technological device, you need to abide by a number of issues. I would have liked that when the government introduced devices for digital technology in Spain, well, the government did not dare or didn't even perhaps think of accompanying the technology with a number of penalties if a number of elements were not met with. So I think that this is the root problem. We allow that the regulation accessibility be not complied with. And I think that Alejandro has mentioned legislation. I think that the highest piece of legislation is the law on human rights by the UN. But unfortunately, there's an additional piece of legislation on human rights for people with disability had to be passed because they were invisible. And this would not have happened if we all had been given equal rights. Well, I have been working on digital home at the university for many years, for 5 years now, and I try not to be too negative, because if a company comes to see us with a fridge and the touch screen on the fridge is at a height of 170 centimeters, and I say, please do not put this there because people in a wheelchair won't be able to use that, then I will not achieve anything. I'd rather say thanks to the fact that your fridge has internet connection and has I will be able to do an accessible connection so that a person in a wheelchair will be able to use a fridge, because such is their rights. So that I'd rather promote a culture of accessibility in the entrepreneurial sector. As I say, I cannot really blame them because the lack of knowledge is just gigantic. In line with what Miguel Angel just mentioned, I'd like to nuance that the problem that we are tackling is rather complex. There's many different stakeholders involved, and perhaps we have been mentioning a few points which have appeared recurrently, such as the role of the regulation, that of the legislation, the fact that there should be some kind of body which will ensure that the regulation is complied with, so that there are also pressure groups, lobbies, in which also come in during public purchasing, also changing the mindset among the new generations of engineers so that they take into account this group of possible users, especially taking into account that the sector of the population with disabilities is increasing. In digital home, the technologies are accessible technologies are appearing, and I think that perhaps here we can propose a number of initiatives in such a complex environment. I'd like to finish on a more positive note, saying that there's some cases in the field of robotic services where products have been introduced in a new market, and these products are intrinsically accessible for all. For example, vacuum cleaning robots, which make this chore easier to all. So in that sense, there's loads of technology which can be developed based on basic products with some standard systems with connectivities and interface that allow for multimodal approach. Because as Dr. said at the beginning, we are programmed to be different. And within this diversity, why not look for happiness in the context of this environment, of this complex world where we live? The economic factors are the ones who move it all, so let's try to set up some kind of regulations in this complex universe so that we can achieve solutions which are possible. Can I just say one word? I think that we have used in this panel only once the word ethics. Well, this is perhaps the second time. And I think that it is very, very important, especially in this kind of concept of digital homes and all the technology which it includes. Well, this can really interfere with your privacy and your independence. So it would be convenient to establish a clear boundary between safety and etc. and freedom. I don't know if there's any other questions. I think we are reaching the end of the session, so if anyone has a comment to contribute or a question to raise, well, if that were not the case, we are going to make a few conclusions. Well, if you wish, is there anything else you'd like to add before closing? Well, if not, I'd simply like to add that after this 1.5 hour, as Jaime has said, we have mentioned it very little, and it sounds a little bit more and weirder to speak about morals and ethics. But all this is fundamental, because all this is a matter of ethics and a matter of rights. And it can be, ethics need to be applied to practical activities, and the citizens' rights, citizens, is an argument which needs to be used because it is a reality. The world is what it is. The economy is what the leading factor, but we do have rights which need to be upheld no matter the cost. And perhaps now, as a conclusion, and being a little bit more practical, I'd like to say that problems are seen as technical solutions that we need to create. But in professional environments, very often we discuss the fact that the concept of design for all has not been foreseen from the beginning of the design, taking into account the users, so that the functional usability, accessibility, and functional diversity of people is taken into account. And in training, it is essential. It would be essential to find the people with disability if they had been trained in any of these fields. We are used to see them because they're an important area of our work. But we need to train professionals of the future, and not only at university but in other areas. And there is, unfortunately, a major lack of knowledge, both technical and rights.